Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Maticus. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Um, Please like the video and subscribe if you enjoy watching it. Today, we are going to talk about a new specterops article going over how to be better at phishing bypasses. This content is all just for educational purposes and should not be used outside of a situation where you have the permission to fish these users. And so with that, let's get into it. So this is an article in Phishing School, which is adorable. Okay, so this article is from Specterops. Specterops is one of the foremost like red team tool developers. Like all of us in the community are watching these guys very closely because they post the playbook for everything. So if anyone from Specterops is watching, shout out to you. We all love your content. So we'll get a little more into this one. So if you're not familiar, phishing is an attack vector in which an attacker will try to lure a subject into typically clicking a link or taking some other action that could result in the attacker receiving the credentials of the victim. So to summarize what they're saying here, they're setting up a situation where you are the attacker. So you, the reader, me, Maticus, I am the attacker, right? And I finally got a click from my phishing campaign. And this is an achievement, right? Like, that means I got it inbound to the inbox and the user was compelled to click on the link, which is great. We don't get to take a victory lap just yet, according to the article. So back in 2014, phishing, for the writer of the article, was as easy as throwing a payload into an exe file, sending out emails, and just getting shells. To get a shell is to get command line access to another user's computer in the context of the user that executed the code that was malicious. So back then, I couldn't believe it was ever so easy. That was 2014. It's 10 years later. So we've continued to overfish the same waters year after year with reckless abandon, and now the fish don't bite like they used to. The same bait doesn't work. The same nets come up empty. We have only ourselves to blame for being so selfish. Selfish? We use EXEs like harpoons, and now they are completely blocked unless they are signed. Okay, so what he's talking about is like you have to sign your binaries to be run in environments that have like hardened security in their operating system images. So, you can't just make a brand new EXE and then send it to somebody if they're running modern endpoint detection and response, which is the same thing as antivirus. I'm going to be making some videos just going over jargon and how to parse it. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Selfish. We move nets of PowerShell until AMSI and constrained language mode cut them into ribbons. So PowerShell is an interesting utility for attackers because it used to be more overprivileged than it is now, and you can run it in several different language modes, such as constrained language mode, which basically lets you not do any of the fun stuff. And then AMSI is the anti-malware scanning interface, which takes a copy of your PowerShell command, moves it over here, runs it, and then analyzes what it does, and then only if it thinks it's not malware, it'll allow you to run it on the machine. We dredged up scores of users with Excel macros until Microsoft almost did away with macros entirely. We even used Mark of the Web bypasses to the brink of extinction. So what he's talking about here is there's a cat and mouse game in security where red teamers will find a flaw, vulnerability, or way to bypass protection mechanism, and then blue teamers, or in many cases just the Microsoft product development teams, will patch those into non-existence, and then the red teamers need to find a new threat on the layer up to be able to infiltrate, and the blue teamers just wait, patch it again. It's part of the reason that getting into hacking is so difficult, is because the history is important, but the current state is arguably just as important. So it's hard to know what to prioritize when you're just beginning learning. And this is exactly what he's saying in the article, is defenses adapt to threats, and we are the threats. So as new phishing techniques emerge, one of the most obvious defenses has always been to try and block the initial access payloads based on their file type. Someone starts slinging malware in Microsoft Excel add-in file XLL files, and suddenly it makes sense for most organizations to just block these files outright. Payload types that were working across the board just months ago tend to make too much noise and now get blocked. So once again, defense adapts to the threats, and we are the threats. So if we start writing articles about how great this particular attack vector is, we shouldn't be surprised when it disappears. We may mourn the fall of our favorite initial access payloads, but not all hope is lost. Let's talk about the challenge of initial access from a high level so we see our options more clearly. First, we'll talk about objectives, and then discuss defenses, and finally bypasses. So this sounds like he's basically going to lay out for us the basis of a phishing campaign, what you can expect in the current day, which is wonderful. I'm going to learn a lot from this. Can it run code? If a file type can run code or open another application that can run code, then it can likely be used for initial access. To get a full list of potentially dangerous files, we can look at the ones blocked by default on Outlook. This we'll get into a little bit later, the specific file types. I'm going to open that. The list is 120 entries long, and that's not even the full list, considering Outlook still allows dangerous file types like macro-enabled Office documents, thanks to Mr. Docs. Another good source is filesec.io. Check that as well. Fabulous. Use the double-click filter to find file types that are particularly useful for phishing. All right, so we go back here, double-click. Okay, and these are the good phishing ones, right? .app installer, application, AppRefMS, AppX, AppX bundle, ASD, BAT. So these are all things that when double-clicked can launch another program, which is a critical functionality in an initial access payload in most situations, just because it's really complicated to get a user to do much more than double-click a file. They're used to double-clicking the file that they just downloaded or the folder, but that's about it, right? Like they might know their specific applications, but they don't know general computing tasks and solutions for the most part. The list is 77 entries long. Our goal for initial access is to successfully deliver at least one of these files to the target and convince them to open and run it. Which file types are allowed will vary depending on controls in your target environment, but it is extremely unlikely that all of these file types are blocked. Often, several of these dangerous file types are used in business processes and have exceptions applied to them. We just need to find one exception. The wall. Okay, let's do a little thought experiment here. So we're going to talk about which of these extensions you all and I think are likely to be ones that have bypasses. The first one that jumps out to me from the list is definitely .bat, which we saw earlier right here. So batch files are used or were used more often in just like legacy Windows environments, or that's not to say they're not still in use, but just to say that they're an older thing that may have some kind of need for backwards compatibility or extended functionality. And that's the one that jumps out to me. But comment below if there's one that stuck out to you. The wall is between us and our target. It is lined with turrets that want to destroy our payload. This wall consists of the corporate proxy, the corporate firewall, and the target's browser. Each has some visibility into what users are downloading, and each will try to prevent users from inviting us into the network. But there's a problem with their eyesight. They really only have 3 ways of knowing what file type is being downloaded, and we can control each one. MIME types. The content type we specify in our server response headers. For example, application, MS Word, text, plain, application, X, MS download. Magic numbers, the first bytes in a file. For example, 54, this is hex, by the way. So 504B, each of these represent a single ASCII character, I believe. 504B0304 for zip files, or 45A for Windows executables. So what they're saying is sometimes they have 3 different eyes, right? And the 3 different eyes, we can tell them what the headers say, if they have an eye that looks at headers, or if they have an eye that reads the magic numbers at the beginning of an executable. We can manipulate that too, right? Under normal circumstances, these indicators should tell a consistent story, like a Windows executable with an extension of exe and a MIME type of XMS download and a 45A, the MZ header for the first 2 bytes. Therefore, you could write a program to detect these dangerous files based on any single characteristic. Writing detections based on all 3 would be extremely redundant. I suspect many software engineers have made this very mistake, choosing a single indicator, writing detection logic, and thinking that would be enough. However, the contents of the file and not its MIME type or magic number are what makes it dangerous. Now that we have a clear view of our adversary, let's talk about how we might slip past their watch. As I mentioned, we will need to slip past the proxy, firewall, and browser controls to get our payload on the target system. However, for the sake of example, let's say the more restrictive of these controls is the corporate proxy. System administrators have fine-tuned their proxy rules to block any attempts to download known malicious file types over HTTP and HTTPS. Similar rules apply to the other 2, but it will help to focus on just one control for now, right? Because if we have to bypass all 3, let's just start with 1. So bypass 1 by exceptions. I told you that the proxy was going to block all malicious files, but were you really just going to take my word for it without testing? Tisk tisk. As mentioned earlier, there are tons of potentially malicious file types we can use. Some may be too obscure for network defenders to even know about. Others might need to be explicitly allowed because of a business need. Wouldn't it cause problems for many companies if every Office document hosted on OneDrive was suddenly blocked? How long will our system administrators take the heat before they cave in and put an exception in? In practice, I've found these surprisingly often, so you might just get lucky. Okay, so this is the rules of the road. The business case and the business need is what takes priority. And if you understand that as an attacker, and if you understand the business case, you can use that to your advantage. And sometimes it'll save you a lot of time and effort and pain. Bypass 2, embed in HTML. Did you know you can dynamically generate a blob of data in JavaScript in the browser, then use just JavaScript to download the contents to a file? This is a totally legitimate feature for most browsers. For example, web developers might need a new way to expose a button on a page to download the contents of a table element to a CSV file for the users. We can use the same feature to download arbitrary file contents to arbitrary file names. What makes this technique useful to us is that there is no separate call to the server to download the payload. We can slip its contents inside a script tag in HTML document like a Trojan horse. The proxy will only see the HTML document being downloaded and not know if it contains another malicious file inside it. This technique is known as embed in HTML, and there are several tools that can help us automate weaponization. Here's one that I've used for years. Boom, embed in HTML. You might want to make a few tweaks so that they aren't signatured based on this template, but the project is a great example of how to execute this attack as well as use encryption to further protect your payload. Bypass 3 is the password protected zip. I've found that zip files are commonly allowed in corporate environments. There's so many legitimate uses for zip that it would be prohibitive to block them outright. To account for potentially dangerous zip files, many security products will actually unzip the contents to see what's inside before making a determination about whether it's safe. What if they can't open it? What if we include a password in our phishing email that our targets then use to open a password-protected zip file? In most cases, the cyber product will not be able to properly vet the file. It will let the users download it anyway. I've seen this technique used with great success to slip all sorts of sketchy file types that passed corporate proxies. Yeah, that's a good one. Bypass 4 is FTP and WebDAV. Did you know that most browsers support FTP URLs? In our example of an extremely restrictive web proxy blocking downloads of HTTP and HTTPS, sending user to an FTP share might slip past unnoticed. In addition, depending on how the proxy settings are being applied, they might not be enforced for explorer.exe visiting a WebDAV share. In that case, you might instruct a target to copy a UNC path and paste it into the file explorer. So like any of these bypasses, you could just like copy this and you could paste it into ChatGPT, and then you could convince ChatGPT to help you do offensive tasks, and then you could tell it to, help you like learn more about why that bypass works. Right? Because what they're talking about with the FTP share and with the UNC path is this is like a known occurrence that happens in like Microsoft environments, right? They may not be enforced for explorer.exe. So explorer.exe visiting a WebDAV share. This is typical behavior in a corporate environment. And the UNC path is like a related concept of some kind. Bypass 5 is mime trickery. You guys can probably see at this point, like what I'm talking about when I say these guys really write the book on this. Mime trickery. Sometimes we can get the receiving web browsers to know the real payload type based on its mime type and spoof the file extension. A classic example of this is that any Internet Explorer treats any file with the MIME type application/HTA as an HTA file and will prompt the user to execute it. If our example proxy is blocking our payload.hta file based on the extension, we can simply rename that file to payload.pdf while still specifying the HTTP header content type application HTA from our server. Bypass 6 is to change the extension. Let's say you want to first deliver a PowerShell script to stage your malware, but the proxy blocked PS1 files. What if we just put a script in a text file and ask the target user to change the file name for us? Along the same lines, you might add a nonsense extension to the file and then instruct the user that they will need to select an application, open it, e.g. PowerShell. Sure, it's not quite as convenient as just having them double-click the file, but you might be surprised what additional requests we can tack onto our phishing message if we already have them on the hook. That's true. Magic number stomping. I've seen many cases where I've successfully delivered a stager written in Windows scripting utilities like PowerShell, Visual Basic, JScript, etc., and seen a request from my stager to load the full payload only to have the stager immediately die. What I found in several of these cases is that because I was staging a .NET assembly or other Windows executable to the download for my full payload was being signatured and blocked based on the first 2 bytes of the file. In this case, the MZ header that prepends all Windows exe and DLL files. To get around this, there's a quick fix that has turned out to be really effective. Is just to remove those first 2 bytes from the file and then programmatically add them back using some logic in my stager. That is really clever. That is really clever. So what he's talking about there is breaking, like literally just breaking the file and turning it into just an unusable mess, and then re-adding the first 2 bytes to the front of the file, making it usable again. That is really clever. These guys are fucking smart. Bypass 8 is to poison existing documents. This is smart too. Instead of trying to directly deliver payloads with our phishing campaign, what if we used Cuttlefish to first gain access to O365, Gmail, or Okta, and then abuse the target's access to backdoor files we need on OneDrive, Teams, and Google Drive, etc. If you aren't familiar with Cuttlefish, it's a tool we can use to bypass multi-factor authentication while forcing phishing targets to log in for us. The point here is that instead of delivering payloads from our phishing site, we target access to places where we expect our target organization is storing and sharing documents. You could even take this a step further and use access to Outlook webmail and Teams to message other employees at the target organization and prompt them to review your changes to your poisoned documents. This is good content. This is good content. We're learning today, chat. Addressing the whale in the boat, aka mark of the web. Many red teamers get discouraged by the mark of the web and treat it like a death sentence for any payload they wish to deliver during phishing. I have to say this is simply not the case. I think it's very rarely the mark of the web is the lost nail in the coffin for phishing payloads. For one, I know of at least 2 mark of the web bypasses that still work. Sorry, I'm not sharing those this time. So I know there's bound to be more. If you dig around, then I'm sure you can find one. And so again, it's cat and mouse, right? Like everybody's reading this. And because everybody's reading this, you can't just share the working bypasses. There's still places to go get them though. Secondly, mark of the web doesn't always mean your payload is belly up and dead in the water. For many file types, it just adds another annoying prompt or two and makes sure the user really wants to keep and open the sketchy file. Finally, you can always just ask your target to right-click the file, select properties, and select the unblock button. Dude, that's 200 IQ. It really is that easy. Keep in mind, this is the absolute most difficult mark of the web bypass out there, and it's not that hard. Most users will be willing and able to perform this bypass for you. This is so well written. Oh my God. I love how this is written. This is so cool. In conclusion, proxies, firewalls, and browsers are going to try and block sketchy files that can really take the wind out of our sails when trying to deliver payloads with phishing. Luckily, we have options, somewhere in the range of dozens and hundreds of options, so it's unlikely that every single potentially malicious file type is blocked. In addition, most security products only block file types based on attributes that we can control. Therefore, we have several tricks we can use to potentially bypass them. Worst case scenario, we just need a little extra social engineering to get our targets to make file modifications before opening and running our payload. And remember, fish are friends, not food. Man, what a good article. Okay, so the dude who wrote this, his name is Forrest Kassler, and I'm grabbing this link now, so I can drop it in the YouTube description when I post this video. Thank you everyone for watching. If you like this kind of content and you want to learn more about red teaming, please like the video, subscribe, and comment. Comments really let me know whether or not the videos are reaching the right audience. So please speak up if you have the time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.